Good morning. Thank you all for having me. It's a pleasure being with you all today. As Brother Nichols said, my name is Derrick Scott, and I have the pleasure of serving as the chair for the Escambia Democratic Party here in Pensacola. Now, I was told to refrain from being a little too partisan in my address this morning, so I'm not sure how this is going to turn out. But I'm going to try my best, but I'm going to pretend like I am anyway, and I'm just going to share my thoughts without saying that you should vote Democrat, vote Democrat, vote Democrat, right? So what I decided to do is share with you what's happening today and why it's important that we as Black men become more engaged and lead this community so we aren't doomed to repeat the sins of the past. Here in Florida, if you haven't figured it out, Black folks are under attack. If you've heard me speak before, then you know that I often say that we are 2 election cycles away from being back in slavery. Well, I'm going to amend that statement today and say that we're not 2 election cycles away, we're just 1 right now. So if you're not convinced by that, let's just take a look briefly at the state of Florida and where we are. The state currently has plans starting in the calendar 2024 that teach our children, those young gentlemen back here, that we benefited from being enslaved, right? If that's not enough, the Florida legislature is trying to severely limit and eventually take away your ability to vote. I'm glad I followed Mr. Williams because I think what we're going to say is kind of in tandem in our message today. With our nationwide repeal on the Civil Rights Act of 1965, along with the failure of Congress to codify voting rights, we are as close to being in the position that we were pre-Reconstruction as we have ever been. As of December 31st, 2022, I'm going to ask a question. Does anybody in here, have they ever been enrolled for vote by mail or received a ballot at home? Okay. Well, as of December of last year, December 31st, I guarantee you, if you have not re-registered, you were kicked off of that roll. They have made it virtually impossible for you to cast your ballot. So if you received it last year and you have not signed up expressly in this calendar year in 2023, you aren't going to get a ballot in 2024. But it's not too late. We'll talk about how that works as we move forward. The Florida legislature right now is made up of, in the Senate, it's a 40-member body. There are 28 Republicans and 12 Democrats. In the House, which is consisted of 120 members, there are 84 Republicans and only 35 Democrats, right? That's what's called a supermajority. Now, what that means for a supermajority is that they have the ability to introduce and pass any legislation without debate, without notice, and the ease of guarantee that it passes is virtually 100%, right? If you aren't aware of what that means, let's talk about where we are right now. This year we saw Senate Bill 7050, which greatly restricted the way we register voters. Democratic Party, Republican Party, organizations like NAACP, Movement for Change, they can no longer go up to individuals and say, hey, are you registered to vote? And give them a voter registration form. We can't do that anymore. It has severely impacted us. Now, what that means, you may say, okay, well, there are ways around that. But Black community is 5 times more likely to rely on third-party voter registration organizations to register voters than our non-Black communities. We also saw the passage and went into law the effect of Senate Bill 1718, which focuses around immigrant communities. Well, some of you may think, oh, well, I'm not an immigrant, I'm okay. But if you've been to the doctor, one of the things that they now ask you that you probably haven't paid attention to, that they now ask you is, are you a U.S. citizen? And they ask you that legally now, right? These are questions that impact all of us. And HB 543, which is the concealed carry law, which now allows individuals to concealed carry, without having a permit. Some might say, okay, that's not too big of a deal. But what does that mean, especially for us in this room? Our black men encounters with law enforcement under this law have now increased the amount of fatalities with black men, because the presumption is you have a gun. You didn't have that presumption before. They may have thought it, but now they can legally think that that is the case now. And finally, HB1, or school choice. If you haven't heard this, this is the ability that now every student in the state of Florida is eligible for a voucher. One might think that's an okay thing, but what is that doing? That takes money out of the public education system and puts it into private school. It's not for people like you or myself or those in the community that you know of to receive a private education. It's for rich people to get a benefit and lessen their burden that they pay for private school education. This is the first step in trying to dismantle the public education system. This has been tried in other states, and it's bankrupted their public education system. Now, we talk about what we can do. Mr. Williams talked about making sure we exercise our voice through our vote. I want to talk about where we are here more recently to present day. We saw in 2018, there was a race between Andrew Gillum and Ron DeSantis here in the state of Florida. That race was decided by only 30,000 votes, which is roughly about 3 people per precinct that needed to vote here in the state of Florida. Right now, we are suffering through a climate where black people are targeted, marginalized, dehumanized, and made to feel like second-class citizens. We fast forward to 2022, we see even more devastating results. We saw here in the state of Florida, DeSantis won by a victory of 20 percentage points, right? Well, some people think, oh, that means that there was popularity in his leadership. No, that's not what that means. That means that more people, specifically people who look like you and I, opted not to vote in last year's election cycle. What does that leave us? That leaves us in the state of turmoil and peril that we're currently faced with right now. Here in Escambia County, if I narrow this down even more to local, black people have a large voting base here in Escambia County, making up about 45% of registered voters. That's countywide, irrespective of party. And 50% of the Democratic Party is are made up of black registered voters. However, last year we only saw 34% of our black registered voters turn out in last year's election cycle, and that's here locally. And of that small percentage of people, only 28% of them were black men. So we've got to take an active and engaged point and position and play a role in this politics. Now, Mr. Williams talked about himself. He's up for re-election in 2024. You also heard from Councilman Wiggins, who's also up for re-election in 2024. We didn't get to, but Commissioner May is also up for re-election in 2024. All of our black electeds here in this city or the Escambia County, except for one, are up for election in 2024. So it's going to be important and vital that we play an instrumental and integral role in making sure that we get out to vote. So what does that mean? That means that not only you need to go out and vote, it means that everybody you know needs to go out to vote. When you go, take 10. Encourage those people to take 10. We can't have what we had last year where we saw people just opt out of the political process. We're in the fight of our lives. We see right now where our presidential nominees are going to be. More than likely, you'll see it be Joe Biden and Donald Trump. The man has told you he is going to be a dictator. He said that. I'm not interpreting it. I'm not trying to put words in his mouth. He said it. He told you what he's going to do. We cannot afford to let ourselves be even further in the peril and state of political disarray that we've got. So that means we've got to play an integral part in voting. Now, I've got cards, and I want to make sure that everybody gets one before we leave here today. In this year alone, 1 million voters thus far in the state of Florida have been removed from their voter rolls. 1 million. Not 100, not 1,000, 1 million. Of that, 60% are, guess what? Take a guess what color they are. They're black, right? So you might think right now that you're good because you voted last year. That's not necessarily the case. You need to check and make sure that you are still registered to vote and that you're still on what we call the active voter rolls. It's going to be imperative and critical that we make sure we do that. We have, for those who are not familiar with what offices are going to be up for election, of course, we know the president, vice president, and the U.S. Senate for the state of Florida, and we have congressional races that are also running as well. Here locally, you've got Alex Andrade, who currently serves as Florida House Rep for District 2, Michelle Salzman, Doug Broxson. They are your local House and Senate reps for this county. They're all up for re-election. The clerk of court, the sheriff, the property appraiser, the tax collector, and the supervisor of elections, they're all up. The county commissioners for districts 1, 3, and 5 are all up. School board members for District 4 and 5. Now, I want to take a moment to talk about the school board race, because if you haven't noticed, school board has been hot this year, right? We're in the news. The state of Florida is leading the nation in the amount of banned books. Those books represent people that look like you and I. They're being banned at droves. Right now, the law is passed that any book can be challenged based on sexual content. Now, you say, okay, well, maybe you might want to think, okay, maybe we need to look at that. The book doesn't have to have sexual content. They just can say, it's sexual content. There's not a review in the world. It automatically gets pulled. So we can talk about a book about Maya Angelou. They can say, it's sexual content. The book goes. Irrespective of what the content is, it goes. You don't want to have that type of overreach and oversight into your history where you're not being considered as part of American history. We've got city council seats for city council seats 1, 3, 5, and 7. They're all up for election. It is going to be integral that we all play a part in this process and make sure that we get out the vote. I'm also going to put out an appeal. There are not enough of us who are running. If you know people in those areas, send them my way, if they're Democrat, of course. But it is going to be imperative that we get those folks out and see more of an adequate representation. And that representation starts with us here in this room. If you're not clear of what's at stake, I just want to share a couple of bills with you that are up for this next cycle here in the state of Florida, in the Florida House, in this next election cycle, right? I'm sorry, this next sixth legislative session, excuse me. There is HB 49. What that is a bill that will allow children of age between the ages of 15 to 17 to work 40-hour work weeks, giving them the ability, allowing employers to schedule them for 40 hours. Now, what child should have a full-time job? That's what's up right now, right? We've got things right where there's a Senate resolution that is scheduled to be heard to say that no person who is a descendant of enslaved people in the state of Florida should receive reparations. Has anybody heard about this bill? No. That's what I'm saying. They are up and listening to that. So let's be clear. Reparations, although some people, depending on where you fall in it, may think it's important, they're cutting it off before you even have the conversation to say, no, you aren't entitled. And they do so based on a date of December 6th, right when the 13th Amendment was ratified. So anybody, and they pay special attention to the language, so it excludes every person of color, every black person in the state of Florida who has a direct lineage for slavery from being eligible to receive reparations, right? Now, again, I go back to say it's not up for discussion right now, but they're cutting it off at the pass. Right now, there is a bill. We talk about the monuments. You've seen all this work that's gone on in Escambia County to remove some of these Confederate monuments, right? And across the state. They're introducing legislation, this next legislative term, that will replace any monument that has been removed in the state of Florida from January 1st, 2017 up to current day. So just because you know right now that it's removed, they're introducing legislation to put it right back, right? These are the things that you have to know about. And what they're not doing, you don't see anything in our news. You don't hear about it on Channel 3, Channel 5, Channel 10. They're not telling you this stuff because they don't want you to know. They're trying to limit your voice and your vote. And to the point that Mr. Williams said, if your vote wasn't important, they would not be working so hard to make sure that you don't have the opportunity to vote. So I encourage you to please make sure that you exercise your voice, get out to vote. He talked about the primary and general elections. It's not enough, to his point, it's not enough to just say, okay, I'm going to skip the primary and I'm going to vote in the general. You got to vote in both. Why you vote in both? Primary elections, particularly local elections, more often than not are decided in the primary. So when opportunities like Councilman Wiggins, Councilman Broughton, who is a representative of District 5, their elections are decided in the primary. So if you hold off to the general election, it is too late. Your voice has already been stifled and you've had no say in the political process. It is going to be imperative. I cannot stress enough how imperative it is for everybody to be acclimated and ready to go. Right now, in the state of Florida, and I think nationwide, Black women are carrying this process. They're carrying the torch. It is now time for us to step up, make sure that we're engaged. I think Escambia County is a unique position because you see a lot of our Black electeds at this point in time are men. We've got to make sure that we support those electeds, get them reelected, and then train up people so when they turn out and when they're ready to sit down, there's someone else ready to fill the void. And that's where I come in. It's my job to make sure that we get those folks on the ballot, get them elected, and do everything we can to support the process. We tried to turn here locally, the party from being people that you only see during election cycles. So I know it used to irritate my soul to see politician come to somebody's church right when right when it's time for them to be reelected, and you don't see them any other time until the next time they need your vote again, right? That's not the case. What we're trying to do here, we're trying to be community partners. We're trying to make sure that you see us all the time and know that you got a voice. We're here to help. If you don't know where we are, I'll share. We're on Martin Luther King and Cross Street at MLK. We're there Monday through Friday. You can always reach out. We also need volunteers. It's not only enough to vote, you got to donate some of your time to. What does that look like? Does that mean you got to knock on doors? Whatever it looks like for you, whatever you can do to make sure that you get people out so that we have a successful 2024, that's what I'm asking everybody to do. So I appreciate your time. I'm going to make sure we get these cards. On this card, there's a QR code. It allows you to register to vote. It allows you to register for vote by mail. I want to spend a minute just talking about vote by mail. Everybody in this room should be registered for vote by mail. Now, vote by mail does not mean that you have to vote by mail. It gives you, what I like to say, your plan A. Going in person should be your plan B, because you never know what could happen when you go cast your vote. Right now, again, as I just mentioned, 1 million people were removed from the voter rolls. You could get there and they say, you're not registered to vote, sorry. Then you're stuck with what's called a provisional ballot. Well, we like to say that those provisional ballots count, but people who cure and contest those ballots are looking for ways to get that ballot thrown out. So the best way to make sure you're registered and your voice and your vote counts, sign up for vote by mail. I'm not saying that you have to vote by mail. I'm saying you should just get the ability to do so. If you choose to do it, fine. If you don't, that's great. But again, those are my asks. I appreciate your time. Thank you for being here, and have a great day.